A story about how Two Live Crew became perhaps the most important hip-hop group for the development of copyright law. Two Live Crew, their heyday was in the late 80s and early 90s through their very thoroughly smutty and raunchy music that was a big hit, in particular with teenage boys like myself at the time. And they decided to do a relatively less raunchy album called As Clean as They Want to Be. And for that album, they sought a license to get the song Pretty Woman, best known for its version by Roy Orbison, but they were denied, and yet they recorded the song anyway with different lyrics about a big hairy woman, and the publisher sued. Two Live Crew claimed that it was fair use, and if it's fair use under the Copyright Act, it is permissible even without authorization from the copyright holder. Fast forward all the way to the United States Supreme Court, where fair use was at issue, where the Copyright Act says fair use of a work is not copyright infringement, although courts tend to treat it more as an affirmative defense. And what the Supreme Court held was that the parody factor of the new song, of the Two Live Crew song, was a big factor in its possibly being fair use. Because when you're parodying a work, when you're commenting on an earlier work, it necessitates using much of that original copyrighted work to make your point. The Two Live Crew said the original version of Pretty Woman is best known as being wholesome and corny, and we were doing something that was a little more bite, a little more edge to it. We were making a raunchy version of it to comment on that wholesome, corny nature of the original. And that's the version of it that the Supreme Court seemed to accept. And again, when you're parodying a work, you're commenting on the original work, so that means you need to use a significant portion of it to make the point. And that was the Supreme Court's directions to the lower court. Following that, there were some other very interesting decisions involving fair use. In fact, every fair use opinion is going to cite the Supreme Court opinion. There was the book called The Wind on Gone, which was a version of the Gone with the Wind told from the perspective of the slave character. And the purpose of that book was to comment on that pro-slavery glamorization of the pre-Civil War South from the original Gone with the Wind. And that was held to be fair use. There was a stage version of Three's Company where the character Jack Tripper, in the original, he was a straight man pretending to be gay so that his landlord would let him live with two women. In this stage version, he was closeted gay and it was tearing him up. And it was the play was commenting on the mores reflected in the original TV show. Now, there are two big misconceptions about the Supreme Court case. One is that the Supreme Court held that parody equals fair use, and it's more nuanced than that. The Supreme Court didn't say if it's a parody, it's fair use. The Supreme Court said parody is a factor that you look into in fair use, and it necessitates using significant parts of the original work to make your point. But it's never obvious when something is a fair use, or it rarely is. The second thing is the Supreme Court did not hold that Two Live Crew's song was fair use. It sent the case back to the district court to make those determinations, and the parties ultimately settled. So there never was a finding whether or not Two Live Crew's version is fair use.